Thank you.
Very good looking it up.
Very good. So, we spent that first hour introducing the concept of demand. We understand that demand is the quantity of a good or quantity of service buyers are willing and able to buy. And it depends on a bunch of things, on the price of the good, prices of other goods, income, tastes, expectations, number of consumers, a bunch of things, right? Throughout the rest of the semester, we're going to be studying properties of demand and how it affects working of the market in the simplest possible way, which means much simpler than this quite kind of lengthy mathematical statement. Obviously, the easiest way to use demand as a concept is a picture. But how can we graph demand? Graph is a graphical representation of a concept, right? Where you have axes. You need one axis for the variable you're trying to explain. And then you have to have axes for the variables that are explanatory variables. How many axes are we going to need? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Have you ever seen a graph with seven axes? Have you ever seen? You've never seen a graph like this, for example? And then, of course, you need a few more of those, right? Something like that. How often do you work with a graph that looks like that? Never. Never. Why not?
It's confusing.
It's confusing. We're supposed to understand it. So what are we going to do? We have this statement, condensed statement about the most important determinants of the quantity demanded, and we want to graph it. How are we going to go about it? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to pick only one of those explanatory variables. The one that is arguably the most important. And we will select the price of the good itself as the single most important variable. So, we will graph demand as the quantity of the good demanded depending on the price of the good. Okay? Assuming all the other variables are constant. Only the price is going up or price is going down. Well, how does quantity demanded depend on the price? When the price rises, quantity demanded falls. When the price falls, you are willing and able to buy more. So demand looks something like that. That makes sense? At a high price, quantity demanded is relatively small. When price falls to low price, quantity demanded increases. Does it make sense? Very good. So this is a demand curve. Demand curve represents all the combinations of prices and quantities consumers or buyers are willing and able to buy at the given price.
What was the first one?
High price, low price.
Oh.
Just label it like that. Okay? So, the entire story of demand that we just completed is condensed in this very simple downward sloping graph of a demand curve. Now, where do we go from here? We jump straight to the other side of the market, or the other component part of the market. If this is all the buyers with their preferences, incomes, and so on and so forth, captured in the demand curve, who are the other people participating in the market? The sellers, right? We call sellers the supply side of the market, right? Supply side of the market. Can you tell me what a supply is? You already know what demand is. What do you think supply is?
It's the manufacturer's offer.
Again, guys, get inspired. From here on, it's going to be very real, very quick. Because it's going to be basically the same process. So what do you think supply is?
Everything right there except for sellers and supply.
Exactly, except
Quantity of
right
good and service that sellers are willing to supply.
That firms, right, are willing and able to
Supply.
or
Produce.
right? Very good. So, if demand is the quantity of a good or a service buyers are willing and able to buy, supply is the quantity of a good or a service firms are willing and able to produce. Now, let's capture factors that determine supply. What does quantity supply depend on? Well, it is a supply function of a bunch of things. Like what? What do you think quantity of a good firms are willing and able to produce depends on? Suppose you're running a business. Let's simplify. Suppose you are running a farm. How do you decide how much corn to plant and produce this year? What are the factors that will determine how much corn you and your fellow farmers are going to be growing?
Well, I was going to say how many other farms are producing corn as well. So say everybody's planting corn this year. You might say, all right, so corn, there's going to be a huge supply of it when it goes to market. Therefore, you're not going to get top dollar for it. Maybe I should plant more potatoes instead. But then you threw in the...
You are absolutely right. Even though absolute majority of farmers, and eventually you, would be able to express the exact same idea with one word. Why is... Okay, let me guide you. Why is it that you are not going to grow that corn? Because there's too many of others doing it, right? And it will cause what?
Oversupply.
And that will cause...
cheaper price.
Oh, price go down.
Yeah.
In other words, why are you not growing corn? Because
Cheap
price is low, right?
Yes.
In other words, is it worth producing something that sells too cheap?
No.
Oh, so is the price a factor that determines how much you're willing to grow? There you go. Now, the fact is, this is how most producers, if not all producers, determine how much to produce. Because if you're a farmer, do you really have information about everybody else's activities and, you know, the maybe US market, but how much do you know about Chinese corn market or whatever, right? What you really need to know is the price, and the price tells you what to do. Now you might say, it's not just price today, it's also price down the road in the fall when you are actually selling that corn, correct?
When you say price, are you saying price
Of corn.
of what
If you're
consumers are
producing
willing to buy?
C'est là.
The price of consumers are willing to pay? Is that what you mean?
Good question. Your colleague here is asking if this price that we're talking about, whether that's the price consumers are willing to pay. I'm saying that's the price at which you will sell, which of course will end up being the price consumers are willing to pay, right?
Yeah, like if the ear of corn's $20 a piece, nobody's going to pay that, you know. But if it was $1 a piece, you know, realistic price.
In other words, it's a price at which you will sell. And if it's $20 per ear of corn, you know, if you find enough people to buy, then that's the point, right? Very good. In other words, yeah, it's the price you will realize. That's the price at which you will sell as a producer. So, again, your colleague, of course, was alluding to the fact that it's not just today's price. It's also the price you expect to sell for in the fall, right? Right now price may be high, but you are just planting. You will be harvesting in the fall. Is it the price in the fall that you expect that will determine how much you decide to plant? Absolutely. That's why we include what in among those factors? Expectations. Exactly. Expectations. So we know it's the price of the good that determines whether you buy more, whether you produce more of it or less of it. It's the expectation of that price that will determine your decision. Anything else you can think of?
Cost to produce.
Cost to produce, absolutely. For example, gasoline prices, if you have to run your tractors, right? Wages you pay your workers, and so on and so forth. In other words, we call those prices of inputs, right? Inputs. Prices of inputs. Input prices. Anything else you can think of will determine your willingness and ability to produce certain quantity.
Competitor price?
C'est là?
Competitor's price?
Competitor's price. What do you mean by competitor's price?
Like if you were talking about earlier, how other farmers are selling corn also, you want to have a good enough deal to where your buyer's happy, but at the same time, you're getting enough money. You're selling it for cheaper, but you're still good with it, that kind of like happy medium.
Wow. It's an interesting, enticing idea. I have no idea how I would work it in over here. No. Look, all things eventually get somehow worked into calculation, right? And I will eventually show you how. But this is like the simplified, condensed version of the same thing, okay? You know, I promise, I'm not trying to blow off your, you know, mental exercise. We will talk about it once we talk about profit, what it really means to make profit. It's actually not as simple as, you know, bookkeeper would tell you.
Isn't it, the rest of the stuff is on there, like, isn't it still dependent on the number of consumers?
Well, number of consumers, the thing is, if you are, if you're a farmer, you're growing corn, do you really know how many corn eaters are on Earth?
No, but if you have a big field and you're producing in Palatka and you're making millions of corn cobs, there's not a million people there. You know what I'm saying?
You're right. Good point. You know, these are, you see, we're going to come up with so many complications, and gradually you will realize that this entire conversation is actually a very subtle conversation, and we're going to have to attack all those concerns one by one, which is exactly why we're starting in the simplest possible fashion, so that we don't get bogged down in detail right there at the outset. So, let me tell you, for now, we will consider it simply. As a corn producer, whether you're producing your corn in Palatka or Midwest, you are selling it in the world market, at the going world market of corn, okay? Just to simplify things.
Okay.
Because if it's something different, if you're in Palatka and you're producing something only Palatka people eat, like you're having the only Irish pub in Palatka, okay, you're producing a particular, that gives you a very specific position in the market. You are some kind of a monopoly, right? Or possibly there are 2-3 other ethnic restaurants competing against each other, competing against you, but there's only few of you, in which case you are an oligopoly, right? All of these things we will address as we go along. But like I said, this is the very beginning. First, we're assuming the simplest possible things. You produce corn, you sell corn at the going market price. Again, being a Midwestern farmer, corn farmer, do you really know how many consumers on Earth are going to eat corn? No. I can imagine most farmers maybe don't know what the population of Earth is, right? Why can they get by without knowing that? How come they can make correct business decisions and make a good living even without knowing how many corn eaters there are on Earth?
Go off of like last year's.
Yes.
Numbers.
Last year's numbers. So last year they knew how many corn eaters there were?
No,
The
they
what-
can
the
see
what?
their total sales, how much they produced, how much was sold, at what price, how much they have left over that they're trying to buy for a cheaper
In
price.
other words, guys, all that information is condensed in one number. Price. We just very lightly touched the surface that will lead us to answer that fundamental question, what's the secret of efficiency? And part of that puzzle is the existence of a market price that condenses all the market information into one simple number. And that price provides such a great information for firms to decide how much to produce, and for you guys, buyers, to decide how much to buy. That when we all act according to the information the prices give us, we end up doing what in this country? We end up transforming our resources into goods and services efficiently. Now, of course, it's my goal to explain to you exactly how this happens, right? By the way, why do you need to know how this happens? What if I just tell you, this is the way it is, and it's like, okay, sounds convincing. Why don't we end here?
So most of us are business majors and are going to be working in fields where
Number
efficiencies are going to be.
You're right. Most of you may be business majors, and you will be directly relying on these insights in your decisions. But even if all of you are not business majors, all of you are voters. And it turns out that policies the government implements alter functioning of the market. And when they alter functioning of the market, they alter prices. And when policies alter prices, they alter behavior of firms and producers. What do you think happens to efficiency? They may reduce efficiency. And if you don't pay attention to these boring things, if you keep electing governments that will distort markets more and more, we had that talk in the last class, right? You will end up, did we? Okay. You will end up with inefficient markets and inefficient economies. So that's why you need to know all those details. So, yes, price is that number that tells you information about what's in here, okay? But you as a firm are deciding to produce a certain quantity. You as a farmer are deciding to grow a certain amount of corn based on that price, prices of inputs, your expectations of all those things. Anything else you can think of?
The demand.
Again,
Buyers.
how do you know demand? That's what tells you.
I'm saying, like, what if Publix, like, requires a certain number of amount of corn? Like, if a Publix, like, hey, I need 100 million corn to a farm, it's going to produce 100 million.
How does Publix convey to farms that Publix needs a lot of corn? Do farmers get business mail that says them, hey farmers, get ready. We, the Publix, are going to be buying corn. Why doesn't Publix have to do that? The price tells the farmers what to do. Soon you will see how that happens, okay? I'm going to show you. But it's all in price, guys. So price of the good itself, prices of inputs, expectations, number of firms, right? Number of firms.
Do the available land and resources have any? Well, in the situation of the corn at least.
Absolutely. How do you know land is not available? It's going to be extremely expensive to lease or buy, right? So prices of inputs tell you all that.
What about government regulation?
Government regulation, absolutely. Once again, it's captured in here, possibly in here, okay? And again, I'll show you exactly how this happens. Once we have supply and demand together and we see how the market works, we will immediately start imposing government regulations, and you will see how government regulations change this, okay? That's where we're heading. How about technology, guys? Does technology determine how much you decide to buy? Sure. Technology. And finally, it's a factor that makes perfect sense, but you might take a while to just conjure it up, and it's prices of alternative goods. Alternative goods, AG, PAG, alternative goods. What do we mean by alternative goods? Like substitutes. But in what sense substitutes? If you're growing corn, what's the alternative to growing corn? Growing soy? Could you, instead of corn, grow soy? Yes or no?
No.
Why not?
Well,
You're trying. You're making plans for this year. You're thinking, am I going to plant 5,000 acres of corn, 1,000 acres of soy, or 2.5 of each, or 1 of this, 4 of that? How are you going to make that decision? You're going to make that decision based on all these things, right? But let me ask you, is the price of soy going to determine your decision to plant corn? How? If yes? Say it very loud. Sure, but that's what I'm asking. Let's say price of soy is rising. Are you going to be planting and growing more corn? No. If the price of soy is rising, you're going to switch to producing more soy, and you're going to be producing less corn. That makes sense? Very good. That's what we mean by alternative goods. Alternative good is a good you can produce using the same inputs, right? With the same land, same machines. Now, arguably, I'm not a farmer. If you guys know more about farming, you tell me, no, you can't. But honestly, I read about it. I know that there are farmers who are switching, depending on those prices, switching from production of one to the production of the other one. Can you come up with some other examples? So let's say you're running a pizza place. You're baking pizza. What's the alternative good? What else could you do out of the same dough, tomato paste, with the same oven?
Calzone.
Calzone. Can you make calzone out of the same thing? Well, there you go. So if the research suddenly shows that if you eat 2 calzones a day, you live until the age of 200, all of us will start eating calzones like maniacs, calzone prices go up, and so what is a pizza place going to do? They're going to switch to production of calzones, and they're going to supply less pizza. There you go. That makes sense? That's the whole idea. Okay? So now we have a complete statement showing the most important determinants of supply. Once again, how are we going to use and analyze supply in this course? Are we going to rely on this strange-looking statement? No. We're going to introduce a graph. A graph, again, on the horizontal axis is going to have quantity supply. On the vertical axis, the single most important variable. Which one is it going to be?
price.
Yes, not surprisingly, it's going to be the price of the good. And now the question is, would you expect the farmers to be willing and able to produce more corn as the price is rising, or less corn as the price is rising? As the price of corn goes up, farmers want to grow more of it, while other things remain constant, right? So supply is going to look like this, correct? And again, interpretation is pretty straightforward. At the low price, you don't bother producing too much. At the high price, you want to produce a lot more. Does it make sense? Okay guys, let me tell you. These two relationships, the relationship between, the inverse relationship between quantity demanded and the price, the direct relationship between quantity supplied and the price, are among the most stable and predictable relationships in all social sciences. This is largely why economics is sometimes considered science, because it deals with predictable phenomena, despite the fact that all of that is a result of human behavior. Are you good at predicting human behavior? Are you good at predicting your own behavior?
Yeah.
You're a well-adjusted kid. Many of us, right? You can't even sometimes predict what you're gonna do under certain circumstances, much less anybody else. So you see, human behavior is extremely hard to predict, if at all, right? That's why we have all these humanities and we have psychology studying you, and it's just so complicated. And then, of course, we have the entire literature pondering the oddity of human existence and nature, right? You're just so unpredictable. But when it comes to certain patterns of economic behavior, like buying, like producing goods and services, these are extremely predictable based on these simple underlying variables. Like when the price goes up, we know firms are going to tend to produce more of that thing unless something else changes. If price goes up, you guys will tend to buy less unless something else changes. That makes sense? Very good. This is why we're going to call these relationships a very fancy name. What do you call relationships in nature that are perfectly predictable and regular? Like, what happens when I let this marker fall? It's going to drop. How do you know?
Gravity.
Oh, that's why we call it gravitational law, right? Law. So, this is law of supply, the law of demand. The law of supply tells you that as the price goes up, quantity supplied increases, and vice versa. The law of demand tells you as the price goes up, quantity demanded decreases, and vice versa. Okay, so the law of demand, law of supply. Very good, guys. Do you have any questions? If not, let's continue. Where do you think we're going with this insight now? Take a look at demand, take a look at supply, and tell me what do you think looks like a natural thing to do? Well, we're going to study a market, where market consists of those who demand and those who supply. If you really want to create a graph of a market, then you have to put both of them together. So that's what we're going to do. Don't take me wrong. It's not like we're going to immediately discover something absolutely unimaginable. But it's nice because it's going to make perfect sense from the very beginning. We have quantity on the horizontal axis, price on the vertical axis, and we have upward sloping supply and downward sloping demand. So now we have both of them in the same graph. And we're going to test drive this little gizmo. Let's ask, what happens if price is high? What if price is this high? What happens in the market? Well, let's take it one step at a time. First of all, can you tell me what consumers or buyers in this market are going to do at such a high price?
Consume less.
They're going to consume this quantity demanded, correct? That's going to be the quantity demanded. How do we know? Because that's the demand curve. That's what the demand curve tells us. It tells us that at this price, consumers are willing and able to buy that quantity. That makes sense? Awesome. What do you think firms want to do at such a high price?
Sell less.
So,
Produce more.
Oh, sell more. Yeah.
Produce, right? Firms at such a high price would like to produce large quantity. Quantity supply. So you see, at such a high price, firms are willing and able to produce a lot more than buyers are willing and able to buy. Now, if firms really produced such a high quantity, what would happen? They would sell a fraction of it, and they would be stuck with unsold quantity. We call that unsold quantity surplus. It's the market surplus. Now, you've heard the word surplus many times before. You took your macro. You talked about budget surplus, trade surplus, and whatnot, right? This is different. This is surplus in a single market, meaning excess supply, right? Excess quantity supplied. Quantity supplied in excess of quantity demanded. That's the surplus. Now, my question to you is, how often do you think your typical market in America operates at such a high price? Is it something that typically happens? Do you see something like that all the time? If you walk into a store, can you see that there may have been surplus of something?
Oh yeah.
How can you tell?
Something goes on sale.
Oh. In other words, when there's more being produced than consumers are willing and able to buy at such a high price, is that price gonna stay the same? No. What will happen to price
It'll drop.
if there's a surplus?
Drop.
Correct, because surplus pushes the price down. Surplus exerts a downward pressure on price. How long does it take in our economy for surplus to push price down? Usually it happens extremely fast. What happens to prices of swimwear in bulk in the fall as the winter is approaching?
Drop off.
Prices are dropping. Why?
That's
Because they still have a few swimwear items still available, right? When you walk there, walk into bulk today, do they still have a few of those last year models hanging there? Really? You're not shopping with your girlfriend for swimwear that often? Not that it's any of my business, but no, I mean, there is no way in February, March, you walk into a store, department store in Jacksonville, and you will find still last year swimwear hanging there. Why not? Because the price has been pushed low enough that it's sold, right? But again, we're talking weeks or months here. Gasoline prices. Have you ever seen gasoline prices move? Oh my gosh, how long does it take for gasoline prices to move? Several times a day, right? There you go. That's why I'm saying, whenever there is a hint of a surplus in the market, it doesn't have to be large. The price very quickly responds, and the surplus pushes price down. Okay? Now, how about we have a market with downward sloping demand, upward sloping supply, price, quantity. And the price in this other market is really low. Let's call it a low price. First, tell me, what do you think firms are willing and able to do in this market with a low price?
Produce less.
Firms are willing and able to produce small quantity supplied. Can you follow from there? Good. How about consumers? How are buyers feeling about that low price?
They want more.
It's such an awesome deal at that price that buyers are willing and able to buy huge quantity, right? Now look, at such a low price, buyers are willing and able to buy a lot more than firms are willing and able to produce. that means? After firms are done producing, a few lucky buyers get a great deal, whereas the rest of them, what about the rest of the buyers? Well, eventually it will. But if the price is that low, is every buyer gonna be lucky enough to buy at such a low price? No, only a few are, and the rest simply can't find that good deal. The price is low, but there's no more goods to buy. In other words, there's not enough being produced. There's excess demand. We call it shortage or deficit. Those are synonyms, right? Shortage or deficit. Now, how often do you see deficit or shortage in a market? How often do you go to a store and you see deficit of something? A lot?
I said not a lot.
Oh, not a lot. Have you ever seen deficit? Has it ever happened to you that you would go to the store ready to buy something with money in your hand and you couldn't buy it? Restaurant. Give me examples.
They're out of a certain food that you like. Fresh catch of the day.
Okay, fresh catch of the day. Wonderful. Does it happen? Sure. For example, they have a special on something. You want to enjoy it, you come at 8:30, they ran out of it at 7:30. Can it happen? Yes. Is it a frequent experience in your life? Do you experience something like that every day? A couple times a week? Maybe that's where you eat, right? But generally, how often does it happen to you come to Publix and you don't see milk anywhere on the shelf?
Pretty much never.
Pretty much never. And this is Florida, guys. We have hurricanes, right? So sometimes there may be shortage of water or something when people buy it up. But those are rare occurrences, rare instances. Basically, something like this never happens. Why not?
Because if it's not on the shelf, then people can't buy it.
Well,
And suppliers are
but that's exactly what doesn't happen. You never run into a situation that you can't buy something because it's not on the shelf. If you have the money to buy it, it's on the shelf. That's the whole idea. Why? How come this never happens? That's what I'm asking.
The price always goes up to counteract.
Because if there were a shortage of something, that shortage, the deficit would immediately push that price up, right? I mean, you guys know, you actually know examples of shortage. You all have actually seen it, maybe not experienced it firsthand, yeah?
So like avocados, for instance, like those are kind of becoming like a rarity because like the fruit flies like them so much and they're therefore more expensive. And then sometimes the price might go down because avocados are very tricky to get when they're ripe. And they only ripe for a certain amount of time and they'll depreciate.
Exactly. So basically the price responds, right? That's the whole idea. And the price responds relatively quickly. Now I asked you, have you ever experienced serious shortage? You mentioned that perhaps, you know, that fish of the day. Guys, when in America do you experience these prices so low that shoppers are waiting in line to get something? And only a few will luck out. Black Friday, right? Because that's the day when prices are set so low that not everybody will be able to buy at that low price. That makes sense? But again, it's one day in a year, right? It's kind of a special occasion. And again, is that shortage, is that low price going to last forever? No, because that shortage, that deficit will push that price up, right? That's the whole idea. Very good. So, what have you learned from these two pictures? First of all, when price is so high that there's excess supply, there's surplus in the market, that surplus will push that price down. On the other hand, when price is too low in the sense that there's excess demand, there's shortage or deficit in the market, that shortage will push the price up. Correct? Very good. Let me now ask you, Is this still within the?
Yep.
Are we good? Very good. Thank you. Can you tell me if there exists a price at which all that pushing and shoving ends, a price at which there is no more upward pressure on price, there is no more downward pressure on price?
Equilibrium.
You used some Latin-sounding word. I don't understand what that is. You're right, of course.
You're the one that's always talking about it.
Where demand meets supply?
Say it again.
Like where demand meets supply?
Where demand meets supply. What's so special about the price where demand meets supply? What's so special about that particular price?
It's efficient.
Well, we're going to go there. But what's special about this price is, first of all, what's the quantity demanded at this price? Well, demand tells you that this is the quantity demanded, right? What is the quantity supplied at that price? It is the same quantity. In other words, at this particular price, quantity demanded and quantity supplied are equal to each other. Exactly. So if quantity demanded and quantity supplied are equal to each other, how much deficit is in that market? None. How much surplus is in that market? None. If there is no deficit, how much upward pressure is in that market? None. If there is no surplus, how much downward pressure is there on that price? None. See? Since at this price, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, there is no upward or downward pressure on that price. That price is in equilibrium. That's why we call that price equilibrium price. Correct? It's an equilibrium price. And we know that at equilibrium price, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Now, how many equilibrium prices are there in this market? Is there another price at which this is true?
No.
No, it's a unique equilibrium price. There is no other price. There is only one equilibrium price in this market. Now, at this equilibrium, at this unique equilibrium price, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. It means quantity demanded is the same number as quantity supplied. Now, if at equilibrium price, quantity demanded and quantity supplied are one and the same number, do we really need two different names for that one number? No. So what are we going to call it?
Quantity at equilibrium.
We're going to call it equilibrium quantity. Okay? In other words, from now on, when we're studying a market, it's going to look like this. Downward sloping demand, upward sloping supply, price quantity, and equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity. That makes sense? Very good. In other words, we're going to be studying properties of the market in equilibrium. Why are we going to study properties of the market in equilibrium? Because that's where the market converges, right? Market tends to stay and be in equilibrium. Why? Because when it's not in equilibrium, there's either an upward sloping or downward sloping pressure pushing that market into equilibrium. That makes sense? Very good. So, market equilibrium is the first concept we're going to thoroughly analyze. We're going to use that word equilibrium so much that before long you will really forget what equilibrium is. And when I ask you, what is equilibrium? Many of you will respond intuitively, oh, it's where demand and supply meet. or when we have equilibrium, market in equilibrium, and demand shifts, I will ask you what happens to the equilibrium, and many of you will tell me equilibrium shifts up and to the right. Or you will tell me equilibrium shifts northeast. I've heard all possible versions of this vernacular. This is why I'll periodically remind you what equilibrium really means. What is equilibrium, guys? Where supply and demand meet?
The balance.
Why are we studying balance? Go that way. Look, guys. The reason why we study market, the reason why we have demand supply and we study equilibrium is so that we know the market quantity and market price of the good, right? That's the purpose. So equilibrium is actually a pair of numbers, PEQE, such that at the equilibrium price PE, quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied is equal to equilibrium quantity. That makes sense? That's what the equilibrium is. Equilibrium is these two numbers with their very special property. That's what the equilibrium is. So when I tell you on homework number 1, find equilibrium in following markets, what is it you're going to be finding? You're going to be finding points? No, you're going to be looking for equilibrium quantity, equilibrium price. That's what we mean by equilibrium, okay? In other words, when students think of equilibrium as a point, it's a good intuitive way to think about it perhaps, but strictly speaking, that's not economics, that would be geometry, right? If you talk about points where two lines intersect, that's geometry. This is not a class in geometry, this is a class in economics, where firms produce certain quantities and buyers buy certain quantities, right? That's what we're talking about. And of course, price at which they make that decision. That's why price and quantity are what you're looking for in equilibrium. So, again, equilibrium is a pair of numbers, PEQE, such that at equilibrium price, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied equals equilibrium quantity. That's what equilibrium is. So, when we eventually see that demand shifts to the right, and I ask you, what is the impact of that shift on equilibrium? What is going to be your answer? Is the equilibrium moving northeast? That might make sense if equilibrium was a point. But equilibrium is not a point. Equilibrium are these two numbers. So if I ask you what happens to the equilibrium, you have to tell what happens to these two numbers, right? Well, what happens to equilibrium price when demand shifts to the right? Equilibrium price increases. What happens to equilibrium quantity? Increases. Excellent. That's the answer, right? When demand for a good shifts to the right, equilibrium price increases, equilibrium quantity increases. There you go.
Can you say that one more time, please?
Sure. In this particular example, when demand shifts to the right, equilibrium price rises or increases and equilibrium quantity increases. That's the answer to the question. What is the impact of this shift in demand on equilibrium?
And the demand shifts to the right. I'm sorry, I didn't write that fast.
Let's say there is a question. I ask you a question.
Okay.
If demand shifts to the right,
Uh-huh.
what happens to equilibrium? That's a question. And your answer is going to be equilibrium price increases, equilibrium quantity increases.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure, you're very welcome. Do you have any questions so far? Yes.
When there be like two sides of it, because in my head I'm thinking like the equilibrium, like wouldn't that be how much they're trying to make? Because like in my head I see it in two different ways.
Okay.
Like the people who just apply to make money to reach the normal goal, but then the people that try to sell a certain amount of goods to make the goal too. Like that's how I'm seeing it in my head.
Okay, and that's fine. There may be all kinds of people in the market, right? There may be all kinds of buyers, and there may be all kinds of producers. But the fact is, all of those producers are represented by that supply curve. That supply curve represents decisions by all producers there are. Okay? Now, is it possible there's all kinds of firms, big firms, small firms, medium firms behind that? It's possible. Is it possible that some of those people are greedy as hell? Is it possible that some of them are extremely generous and simply farm because how beautiful the soil smells? Possible. But the fact is, whatever drives their decisions, they will eventually decide to produce certain quantity. And they will definitely make the decision based on price. And other things, as we've said. Okay? And I have no idea if I answered even a part of your question. Have I?
Kind of.
Kind of. We'll get there. Very good. Okay, guys. So, now we know what demand is. We know what the supply is. We know what demand and supply look together. We understand what the equilibrium is, guys. This is our fundamental analytical tool to studying the market. Supply-demand diagram together is the easiest and most powerful way to study how single market for a single good works. Okay? Now, let's test drive this new powerful tool. Let's analyze this particular change. You have demand, supply, price, quantity, and the market is in equilibrium. Let's study what happens in this market if income of buyers is increasing. Income of buyers is increasing. Try and recall which of the two curves contains income as a factor that determines it. Demand. Income is a demand factor. Remember? When income rises, do we tend to buy more stuff or less stuff?
More. Better quality.
Correct. More, unless we buy less, right? So, when do we actually buy more? Or what do we buy more of as we get richer?
Nice.
Of nicer things, meaning normal goods. Exactly. So, let's assume this is a market for normal good. So assume this is a market for normal good. Income is increasing. Do we tend to buy more normal good or less of normal good as we get richer? More normal good. My question is, which of the two curves do you think will change? Demand, because income is a demand factor. How will the demand curve change?
Shift right.
Your colleague here is saying shifts right. Why is it going to shift right when we're saying that rising income increases your demand for good? Why doesn't it increase up? Increasing means going up, right? Why does your colleague here say that increasing demand means demand curve shifting to the right. When you're rising, how often do you actually move to the right?
Because the x-axis is quantity demand.
Say that?
Well, it's going to shift to the right because the x-axis is quantity demand.
See, this is how important it is to know the words we're using. Demand is a... What is demand? Quantity. Okay? Demand is the quantity. Which axis is quantity? Horizontal axis is quantity. So when demand increases, quantity you are willing and able to buy is increasing, right? In which direction along this axis is the quantity increasing?
To the right.
To the right. That's why increasing demand is the demand shifting to the right. Correct? Awesome. So, when income increases, income of consumers increases, in a market for normal good, demand will shift to the right. Now my question is PE and QE still the equilibrium in this market even after demand has shifted?
No.
Correct. How do you know?
Because demand has changed.
Well, how do you know that with the new demand, this is no longer a demand? The D doesn't exist anymore. Only the new demand, D prime, exists. How do you know this is no longer equilibrium price?
Because they're meeting at a different point more to the right.
Because prices
Because
going
the
up
price
and
is
quantity's
going
going up.
Look. At this price, the old equilibrium price, firms are still willing and able to produce the same quantity. Is that correct or not? Yeah, because this is still supply. So even at that old equilibrium price, this is what firms are willing and able to produce. So why are you saying this is no longer equilibrium price? Firms are loving it just like they did before.
Because the quantity demand is.
Oh, it's because demand is now shifted to the right. So at this old price, consumers are now willing and able to buy more, a lot more good. In other words, this would be the new quantity demanded. Is quantity supplied and quantity demanded equal to each other at the old equilibrium price? That's why the old equilibrium price is no longer an equilibrium price. At this old equilibrium price, there are now many consumers who wouldn't be able to buy. In other words, there would be deficit, correct? In other words, rising incomes at the old equilibrium price would result in a deficit in the market. Is that deficit going to stay there forever? No. This is a market economy. We know that in our economy, deficit pushes the price up. How far up is the price going to shift? Not shift. It's going, how far up is the price going to rise? Until the deficit vanishes, right? Until the deficit disappears. At which price will this deficit disappear? At the new equilibrium price, PE prime. But of course, at that new equilibrium price, PE prime, quantity demanded and quantity supplied are again equal to each other, and we call that the new equilibrium quantity QE prime. Does it make sense? Very good. So, the market is no longer in the old equilibrium, it is now in the new equilibrium PE prime, QE prime. Now, are we going to analyze the change in the market resulting from rising income through such a cumbersome multi-step analysis every single time with so many lines, dashed, full lines, and so on? No. Typically, we're going to do it like this. Much simpler. we simply show the outcome without showing the process, right? We're going to show as the demand shifts to the right, there will be new equilibrium price, new equilibrium quantity, and that's it. That makes sense? Very good. So, what did we just find out? As we are getting richer, we're producing and consuming greater amount of the good at a higher price. Is that something you knew before, or is this the first time you see a result like this? It's kind of intuitive. Can you come up with examples where exactly this happened? Let me tell you guys. 100 some years ago, like 1900, you could buy a house on Long Island for $500. Can you buy a house on Long Island for $500 today?
No.
Today, houses on Long Island are a lot more expensive. That's why there are a lot fewer of them, right? There's fewer people living on Long Island today than there were 100 years ago, correct? No. There's a lot more people there in a lot more houses. How is that possible? Despite the fact that prices are high. How is that possible? Because we as a nation have become much richer, right? Number one. Is it also true that there's more of us?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you think would be the impact of rising number of consumers, rising number of buyers on the market? Same thing, shifting demand to the right. Anything and everything that shifts demand to the right results in a rising quantity and a rising price. So over the last 100 years, as the population in this country has been rising, as our incomes have been increasing, prices of goods and services tended to go up, and we end up producing and consuming more of it. That make sense? There you go. Okay, we definitely have time for one more application. Let's say demand, supply, price, quantity, equilibrium in the laptop market. Okay, laptop market 20 years ago. Question: has income risen over last 20 years? Absolutely. Are laptops a normal good or an inferior good? It's a normal good. Laptop is a normal good. So, what is the impact of a rising income on this market? Just like here, demand shifts to the right. And just like there, we see that there are a lot more laptops today than 20 years ago. Is that true? Do more people have laptops?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And of course, laptops today are a lot more expensive than 20 years ago, correct?
No.
You're only saying it because you're too young. You don't remember what laptops cost 20 years ago. Are laptops today really more expensive than 20 years ago?
Depends what kind of laptop you
Okay, what kind of a laptop?
get. A Mac. Things are
A
expensive.
Mac is so much cheaper today than it was 20 years ago, or anything was 20 years ago.
Well,
even
they're
that-
more expensive than some laptops.
I'm sure. You're absolutely right. But the bottom line is, what happened to prices of laptops over the last 20 years?
They decrease.
Decreased dramatically. Is that what our analysis tells us? Do you see that price going down or going up? Oh my God. What's happening? Did we, like 10 minutes into our analysis, showed that this is actually a wrong tool?
They're getting more efficient.
Say it again?
Their production's getting more efficient.
Elaborate. What do you mean production is getting more efficient?
Well, when computers were first coming out, they only the technology wasn't there. It was a higher price, and
So
now
your colleague here suggests that the technology has improved over the last 20 years. Is that fair to say? Also, how many firms produced laptops 20 years ago?
Not many.
Not many, a handful. How many firms produce laptops today? So, number of firms has also increased tremendously. My question is, which curve is determined by these two factors? So, is it possible that supply curve has also shifted over the last 20 years as a result of these two factors? Absolutely. Now, would you say that technology increased just or improved just a little bit, or has there been some serious improvement in technology? Serious, enormous improvement in technology. How about number of firms that produce it? A lot more. So is it fair to say that supply not only shifted to the right, but shifted tremendously?
Yes.
Absolutely. If supply shifted this dramatically from S to S prime, this far, where's the new market equilibrium? Well, it's the market equilibrium determined by the new demand, D prime, and the new supply, S prime, correct? So what is the impact of these two changes happening simultaneously on quantity of laptops? What happened to quantity of laptops in the market? Gone up tremendously, right? Huge increase in quantity. While the price is doing what?
same.
Going down. So we have pronounced increase in quantity and price going down. Does this make sense, guys? Okay. So here we have an application of our supply-demand graph into a simultaneous shift in demand and supply in response to multiple underlying market changes. That makes sense? Very good. Now, is it always true when you have demand and supply shifting to the right at the same time? Is it always true that price must go down? No. If supply shifted only a little bit, price would still be higher, right? On the other hand, if you have demand and supply shifting to the right simultaneously, what do you think will happen to quantity? They both shift to the right. It must increase, right? So look, guys, it's interesting because when demand and supply are shifting to the right, there's only one thing you can say for sure, and that is quantity will increase. The price may either go down or it may go up. What is that going to depend on? The demand and supply, right? In other words, on the relative size of these two shifts. How would you compare the size of the demand shift and the size of the supply shift? Here, supply shift is much larger than the demand shift, right? We say that the shift in supply dominates the shift in demand. And because the rightward shift in supply is dominated, the price falls. If you have both curves shifting to the right and the demand shift dominates, the price will go up. That make sense? All right. Do you have any questions? Well, let me tell you where we go from here, and I can imagine it's going to be just enough before the spring break. So please bear with me a couple more minutes, and I'll tell you where we go from here. When we return from spring break, we will review, obviously. I will introduce the same idea, and we will start solving problems numerically. In other words, instead of just the lines and points and PE, QE, we're actually going to solve for real numbers. That's the first thing we're going to do. Second, and by the way, let me ask you, why do you think it's a good idea to introduce numbers? Do you really, really love number crunching more than anything else? No. I don't doubt you can do it, but wow. Guys, are we going to learn more about changes in quantities, in equilibrium quantity and quantity supplied if we put numbers here? No. That equilibrium price goes down whether we have just symbols or there's numbers. You're not going to learn any more about that. So what are the numbers useful for? Guys, numbers become indispensable and extremely useful the moment we're gonna measure not just qualitative results going up or down, but once we're gonna start asking questions about policies. Like, what happens to this market if we impose a tax on consumers? What will happen if we impose that same tax on producers? What if we subsidize someone? What if we impose other types of policies? And suddenly you see that to uncover the fine aspects of, or those fine, subtle changes in the market, it's not enough to have a picture. You have to have numbers. Okay? So that's what we're going to be doing when we get back from sugar break. Thank you so much. No roll.